Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Brendan Housler with EVOQ Bike. I'm here with Landry Bobo, also from EVOQ Bike. We're both coaches, and we wanted to talk about torque training. And this is not a controversial topic, but the jury is out. Some people really believe in it. Other people, they're not sure about it. And other people say, nah, I'm not going to waste my time with it. So before we get into what we think about it and if you should apply it to your base training, torque training, Landry, what is torque training exactly?
Yeah, torque training, low cadence training, big gear intervals, whatever you want to call them. It's basically riding at a lower than normal cadence to make you stronger. It's pretty simple.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you say make you stronger, is this a replacement for the gym?
No, uh, definitely not. I think it's really totally different. I think the gym combines really well with low cadence, but it's definitely not a replacement. I think there's separate benefits to both of them.
Okay. So you'll see if for people that are looking through Strava, a lot of pros have been doing low cadence work for a long time. I've been doing torque training since I started training in 2009, and it's always been a part of my base training. And more recently, I've tried to incorporate it into year round training. And the biggest thing that athletes anecdotally had told me when they would go through the process, they said, man, at first I felt like I was just pushing this big gear. And then as I kept doing this, I just felt like I developed another gear. And what are the benefits that you've come across, Landry, whether it's from the anecdotal side or from like the literature side? And is there any literature on this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know that there's any literature that could definitively confirm that low cadence training works, but it's such a hard thing to study because I think so much of it is only going to be applied to like a real world setting, like a race or something that you can't even test in a lab setting or even just subjectively. And at the end of the day, if you feel it makes you stronger, then it's doing something. I mean, we didn't know 50 years ago that 90 grams of carbs per hour would would uh would be the best for cycling performance, but that doesn't mean it wasn't what we should be doing just because there wasn't a study for it. So
Mm-hmm.
um I think kind of like what you said was a lot of times people feel like they have an extra gear. Well, that's really true because if we look at a pedal stroke, it's the way to generate power is cadence times torque. So you can either improve your power by increasing your RPM or by increasing your torque. So you can pedal at say 90 RPM, and if I can stay at 90 RPM but shift to a bigger gear, I'm doing more power. So and here's the deal is a lot of times you can't increase your cadence anymore. If you're on a climb, you can't pedal at 100 RPM. So you get to a point where you can't increase your cadence any further. You need to train your body's ability to produce torque if you want to produce more power. And I've seen this a lot with people, not a lot. I've seen this sometimes with people that do a lot of their riding on the trainer, and they can pedal at whatever cadence they want. They can ride at 100 RPM all the time. They get out on the real world, in the real world, do a Grand Fondo or a hill climb, and they realize, oh, I can't pedal at 100 RPM, and they just totally fall apart. And so you have to incorporate those lower cadence intervals to really train that ability to produce torque.
Excuse me, you feel it in the muscles. Like when you're climbing a lot, for someone that, if you live in a flat area or you don't have the ability to go climb, especially when I moved from to North Carolina, when I went from, let's say, 1,000 feet of elevation per hour to 2,000, I thought, yeah, okay, yeah, it's double the climbing, but it's not going to be that bad. Just constantly climbing, my legs just, you start to get this different type of fatigue. I wasn't exhausted from riding like a 5 hour ride. It's just, oh dang, we are grinding up this. Even if you have really big gear, um, to
Mm-hmm.
be able to spin more, you still have to have that ability to just churn out watts at a lower cadence. Um, I think the how do you incorporate this? I don't think people need to go crazy with it, and I'd be curious to hear your recommendations because I've been through some times where I've done it twice a week, and I feel like doing even just 30 to 40 minutes was really beneficial. And sometimes, if I didn't want to be so focused on specific intervals with it, if I was going on a weekend ride where it was like, hey, go get 40 minutes of tempo today, I would just do it whenever the road tilted upwards. So, is that effective, do you think, when it's these short 3 minute, 2 minute, 5 minute, all combined? Or do you think it has to be sustained and, 10 minutes at a time or whatever you would
Mhm.
recommend?
I almost split up torque intervals or low cadence intervals into like two different categories. So there's one style of intervals where we're trying to increase our torque capacity, so the ability to just push a bigger gear. You could almost say that's analogous to like a VO2 max interval if we're looking at the aerobic side of things. And those ones, it's training your ability to just produce more raw torque. So we keep those ones to like 4 or 5 minutes. The goal being, say you do these low cadence intervals at 300 watts. We start at 65 because you've never done them before. And that's really hard. You get a little bit more comfortable, bring it down to 60, get a little bit more, bring it down to 55. You could even get down to 45 RPM, which is about the lowest I've gone. And if you get comfortable at doing that, you really feel an extra gear whenever you start doing those VO2 max intervals. That 370 feels a heck of a lot easier because you're able to do them at whatever cadence you want. 90 RPM feels a lot easier when you've done 45 RPM. The other style of torque interval, I would say, would be more improving the muscular endurance side of things. So especially if you want to improve your ability to do long efforts or gravel racing, 10, even 20 minutes, I prefer to do those a little bit higher cadence, maybe more like 60 to 70. And that's kind of similar in a way, but just more training the muscular endurance. So again, if you're doing a gravel race or something like that, or a road race with a summit finish, and you got to ride close to threshold for an extended period of time, but you can do it at 90 RPM now instead of what you were doing in training at 60 RPM, it's going to be a lot less fatiguing and a lot less taxing. And your muscles are just going to be able to handle it better.
So, who would you say this is for? Every cyclist, or who would you highlight these for the most?
There are certain people who I think it's more beneficial for, and certain people who I wouldn't even give them at all. So, if you find you naturally kind of grind at a low cadence as it is, I wouldn't do these at all. I would actually try to work on increasing your cadence. But I think when we get any cyclist who tends to ride at a relatively normal cadence, and especially someone who hasn't even done them before, I think we can just get benefit just by mixing it up. Varying your training is one of the best ways to get stronger. So if you've been riding for 8 years and you've never done these before, try doing them and just see how you feel. If you've always done your tempo intervals in the winter at 90 RPM, try doing them at 60 RPM. It feels a lot harder and it's probably going to make you stronger. So, and then the other thing is, I think just people who tend to struggle more muscularly. I know for me, this is the case. I lived at 7,000 feet for my whole life, basically. And the first 10 years of my training, that's where I rode. So that was normal to me. So I had a very good aerobic system, but at altitude, you're not able to produce as much power. And so going to lower altitude, it always felt much more taxing on my legs than my cardio. And so it was more a matter of kind of training my muscles than it was my aerobic capacity. So I've seen this with even runners who they don't have the ability to produce torque very well because they have a great VO2 max, really solid FTP, but they're just fall apart because their muscles aren't used to sustaining that torque that you need for cycling. Because with running, really your only resistance is your body weight or, if there's an uphill like the terrain. But with cycling, it's about it pushing as big of a gear as possible effectively. If we want to look at Tadej Pogacar, he even shortened his crank length to 165 just because he's so aerobically fit that in order for somebody of his body size to actually be able to push that big of a gear Like you need every advantage you can get.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think also if an athlete's wondering or trying to think of an applicable scenario, whether you're a mountain biker, I mean, tons of torque in mountain biking. If you're in a road race, even, and you're coming over the summit, and there's those times where you just dig into the pedals and you are absolutely smashing, but you're doing it at 75, 80 RPM and just hanging on. That type of intense pressure on the pedals, number one, you're going to get stronger from that if you're lifting weights in the gym because the force you create is so much stronger. But if you're used to doing this, what Landry said like 3 times, if you're used to pedaling at 45 RPMs and really digging in on some efforts,
Mm-hmm.
those super hard efforts, they just flow better. It's going to be less of a cost against your muscles, and
Totally.
you're not going to be as shredded afterwards. So
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, the reason I would say there's no downside to trying this. And if you take a couple blocks of training and just add some lower cadence to, you don't have to, you're not asking yourself to reshuffle everything in your training. Add it to your tempo ride, add it to a day when you go to the gym. I think you're going to really see a difference if you're strength training and you start doing the torque training. You just find some days where you feel like a monster. It's
Oh
like,
yeah.
what is going on with
It's
my
like the
leg?
bike just pedals itself pretty
It's
much.
crazy. Yeah. So deadlifts and torque, those are a delicious combination.
Oh
But
yeah.
what can you remember when you were looking through, like, are there still a lot of pros doing this that you saw on Strava or guys in your pro athlete analysis?
Yeah, I think it's definitely pretty common to see professional riders doing this kind of training. So there's got to be something to it if we look at the best riders in the world doing this style of training. Um, there's got to be something to it, and I think it kind of goes back to being able to push your aerobic system as hard as you can with the muscles. You can have a great cardiac system, a great stroke volume, VO2 max, tons of mitochondria. If your muscles can't actually sustain the torque to max out, it's not going to do any good. So you might even find this yourself. Like, when you go hard, do you feel like you're maxed out aerobically? Or do you feel more challenged muscularly? And I know I've experienced this myself when I've done a lot of torque training and then I start doing 30-15s or VO2 max. It kind of feels in the legs kind of like I'm doing a torque interval. And then I just remind myself, oh, I'm used to this sensation. I can push this kind of a gear.
That's a great example that I should have used for like that digging over the climb, 30-15s, 40-20s, just smashing, laying off the gas, and then having to turn that big gear again. I mean, that is torque.
Yep.
To your point too of when you said, "Hey, if these pros are doing it, there must be something to it." I did a podcast with Grant Holicky, who has a ton of experience, and he had said, even a guy like Steven Seiler will tell you that he'll go in the lab, they'll find something out, and let's use his classic 4x8s that everybody started doing when he put the paper or whatever it was out a few years ago. He'll go to these pro teams and say, "Hey, we just found this out in the lab," and they'll say, "Cool, we've been doing that for a decade." Like, and it's not a diss on him. It's just things in the lab do not lead the training. A lot of times it catches up to what people have
Mm-hmm.
figured out have worked.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always looked to what experienced riders are doing and asked them, okay, how do you execute this? Why do you do it? When do you do it? And then I would try it on my own, and some things work, other things didn't work for me. And that's I think a huge message to always remember, torque training might not be for you, but there's a lot of people it will be for it. And if you never try it, you're never going to know. So no cost in trying it. I would definitely give it a shot. And yeah, if you do, let us know how it turns out. Did we miss any bullet points on torque training that you want to leave for the people, Landry?
The last thing I would talk about is kind of just improving your efficiency and your overall pedal stroke. If you want to get good at something, it's always good to kind of break it down or slow it down. So, to learn the proper technique, if we look at other sports or like weightlifting, if you want to learn how to do powerlifting or something like that, you always break it down into the simplest components before you string it all together. So, I do find Again, especially for newer cyclists who are really trying to build that efficiency, slowing it down to 50 RPM really allows you to focus on just that smooth pedal stroke. You even can see it. Newer cyclists, you can visibly see that they are less efficient than a more experienced cyclist. And so that's something to really make sure that you nail down early. Before you get too far into your training, you need to make sure that you're pedaling efficiently.
That's a really good point that I didn't think about. You can definitely feel if something's off in your pedal stroke, or even more if it's not feeling symmetrical, if there's a little kink, or it's like, ooh, this is some, maybe I need to address something with
Mm-hmm.
gym work or PT or whatever. But yeah, it's almost like it finds out a problem before it becomes a problem. I like that. Any other points?
Uh, the last one I've heard is from other coaches is muscle fiber type conversions. So especially, I think it was a Fast Talk podcast. Sebastian Weber was talking about VO2 max, VLA max, and he was talking about if you really want to, if you're more of an aerobic rider or you want to train for time trials, gravel racing, hill climbs, that the low cadence training can train fiber type conversions to being more aerobic. The idea being if you're pushing a bigger gear, you're recruiting more muscle fibers. And by doing aerobic intervals, you can create or you can fiber type conversions to transition to be more aerobic.
Which is a good thing for cycling.
Yep.
Awesome. Everybody, well, maybe not everybody. Most people, give it a try. Let us know how it goes. Good luck with your training, racing next year. Maybe you still got some racing. Maybe you're getting into the cross season. And if you need more help, check out the free blogs on our website, evoq.bike, EVOQ.bike. Hit us up.
We actually have a blog on this topic, which I forgot to mention that. But
We'll put that in the show notes and link to blog. And if you have other topics that you are curious about, search on our YouTube channel. If there's a niche topic that we haven't covered yet, let us know and we'll try and do our best to hit it. All right. Thanks for tuning in. Landry, thank you. Everybody, good luck with your training and racing. We'll talk to you soon.